This is the Leadership and Insurance podcast, brought to you by FinPro Search Partners.
Insurance companies are businesses and they need to look for the long term and be sustainable.
We went from 0 to 1 and now it's going from 1 to 100.
Insurance as a concept, as a kind of service, is brilliant. The execution is what we're looking at now. I think the companies that are going to succeed are the ones that are going to understand and master the art of intent. When we talk about innovation, we lean too heavily to think about technology and we don't think about creating a culture of innovation. I think innovation is essentially continuous improvement of existing processes and platforms and product.
Right? It's got to be easy. It's got to be seamless. Hello and welcome to the Leadership and Insurance podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bond, and I am incredibly fortunate today to be joined by a good friend of FinPro. It is Tom from Supercede. Tom, how are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you. And I'm going to have to be transparent here. That we had the very last minute dropout, and I'm saying 15 minutes before we're about to record, and we're about half an hour later. And I said to Tom, would you be happy to do a podcast? Which we've been talking about doing for a while, but he said, go on then, because I've got a really busy week next week and it's Friday. So here we are. So forgive us if we're less professional than normal. I hope we won't be. I'm sure we won't be. But Tom, we know you really well.
Do you mean to say that these are normally like meticulously planned?
You'd be surprised how much planning goes into my podcast and the way it goes out. But yeah, there is usually some planning and some thought and questions. But yeah, not as much as the podcast that you're involved in, or certainly your company's involved in, because that's very professional. And I was lucky enough to be a guest on there. But we're digressing because we're doing that thing that people that know each other do. Tom, who are you? Who is Supercede? And then we'll dive into some questions I've frantically written down recently.
Sure, well, good to be here. My name's Tom. I'm Chief Commercial Officer at Supercede. Supercede, for those that don't know, is a software company completely dedicated to reinsurance. And the idea of the platform is that it helps to connect cedent reinsurance buyers, reinsurance brokers, and reinsurance underwriters in a way that they can collaborate on deal data, collaborate on deal contracts and moving terms and conditions over time, and connecting with lots of different other systems and platforms.
Amazing. There we go. There's a man that said that plenty of times. And none more so than lately, potentially. And this is very unprofessional again, because I've also got loads of sun in my eyes, which I'm now having to frantically put a blind down for. But why is reinsurance so kind of under-resourced in terms of new tech? Because that's certainly something that I've noticed. We work with insurtechs and on the reinsurance technology side, very few. So why do you think that is? Is it where it is in the value chain? Is it the complexity? Potentially it's a combination of the lot.
So it's where it is in the value chain, and it's also kind of a misunderstanding as to the complexity of it. So to that first point, I often think about insurance as like a big ocean of fish that are swimming around, and right at the top you have your retail brokers and your MGAs, and they're like brightly colored tropical fish like swimming around the coral trying to attract the attention of like domestic buyers. And then it kind of goes down and the fish get a bit darker and a bit uglier as you get, until you get to like the retrocessionaires kind of gobbling little morsels off the bottom of the ocean. And so things become less pretty and things become less efficient, and things become much more bespoke as you get further down that value chain. And so what that means is that it is a much more entrepreneurial environment. That's one of the reasons that I love it. Is it's all about solving really bespoke, really big problems for huge sums of money. But that means it's harder to build solutions for it. You're not after a kind of really pretty looking catch-all thing that's going to attract people. So that's one of the issues. The second issue is, it's obviously seen as part of the insurance ecosystem. I think a lot of the time, like virtually every article that you look at, virtually every conference that you go to, virtually every person's CV, they write like re-stroke insurance, or the re is in brackets, and they try and capture insurance and reinsurance into one thing. And so what that tends to mean from a technology perspective is reinsurance is seen as like an additional bit of the insurance industry. And because of its, the size of the number of practitioners that are involved and things like that, it's often seen as a bit of an afterthought. And that means that the solutions often aren't quite fit for purpose. They're trying to shoehorn, what is quite a bespoke reinsurance environment into an insurance-shaped box. I think that we've been quite successful because for us, it's kind of the only thought rather than an afterthought. And so we can build things that actually work for that space in particular.
Nice. I'm stealing your ocean analogy for the team of people that I'm trying to hire at the moment, because I was also thinking things get more resilient as they go further down as well, and more robust from a variety of threats and pressure. But yeah, I was enjoying that analogy far too much, I think. Good. Yeah, it's also a really exciting time for Supercede. Obviously, we're sitting here probably 2 days out after, I think, the press announcement for the funding round. Pretty significant funding round. I think, was it $15 million? $15 million? Is that correct? That
$15
was
million.
announced.
Yeah.
15 million, yeah. Which is a pretty sizable chunk of change for a very, relatively, it's a very specialist part of the market. You're addressing a very specific problem, as you rightly said, in the reinsurance space. And it's been a tough funding environment, and we're talking about this all the time. And particularly the UK, for a UK domiciled business as well. I think that in the wider context, that's a pretty decent raise. But in the UK context, that's a really big raise. And why do you think you've been able to attract that investment in a time when people have sort of struggled to get investment at similar stages?
So firstly, I think that there's like a lot of generalizations around like the state of the funding environment at the moment, and people say, oh, it's bad or it's good, and they use kind of one word adjectives or descriptors for it. I think it's just changed and evolved, and I don't think that you can rely on a technology company that's acting as an MGA or a technology company that's acting as a risk taker as kind of a bellwether for the entirety of the investment kind of environment or the investment climate at any time. Actually what we do like couldn't be more different to a tech-enabled MGA, and so why are we bucketed together in this like insurtech bucket, and why should the climate for investment be the same? The investment climate has always been very, very good for boring companies that solve really important problems. I don't think there is like a good time or a bad time. If your company builds technology which is boring enough that it just works and solves a really important business problem that's been around for a long time, and without you probably will continue to be around for a long time, I think that that's attractive. And provided the fundamentals of the business are good, and provided your competitive environment is good, and provided you're raising at the right time, which means you're kind of reducing that competitive pressure rather than increasing it, then I don't think you have to time the market quite as much. It's almost like retail investment, right? Like time in market and the fundamentals of what you're buying are far more important than timing the market.
Yeah, you make a really important point, and look, InsurTech a few times has had a bit of a kicking as a piece of terminology on this podcast. I'm always a bit sensitive about it because we say that we're an InsurTech specialist search firm. So if I kick it too much, everyone goes, well, what do you actually do? But yeah, I mean, there's broadly two buckets.
Look, it's a technology. If you're going to define it as a technology business that relies on and runs on people with knowledge of the insurance industry,
Yeah.
then I think that's an absolutely fair categorization. And if you're a recruitment firm, then that's how you're going to categorize it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the variation in product is massive, as is the variation of like insurance product that's out there.
Mm,
In,
mm,
insuring space shuttles is not the same as Ford Fiestas, or
yeah.
and equally not the same as the risk of relegation to a Premier League football team, or like
Mm,
all the
mm,
different things that you can buy insurance for.
mm. Yeah, I mean, something we talked about actually last week on the podcast. I said that the time to ramp up and people overcomplicate how difficult insurance is. But it's more that we talk about having to know insurance. Well, you don't have to know insurance. If you're a space underwriter, you need to know about space insurance and everything that relates to that. You don't need to know about, and your example, like motor, for example, is irrelevant. So it's irrelevant information. So sometimes when, and it will be social media commentators like me, you have to kind of use kind of exactly like polarization, good and bad, or kind of broad terms, and actually they're quite unhelpful. But yeah, I love that we do boring company, boringly efficient software. That's what we sell.
Yeah,
Um,
sometimes it's good to be boring.
yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like, yeah, no one. I think no one works with us because we're. I mean, maybe a bit more personality, but realistically, it's about can we efficiently deliver you talent? It's not about how exciting we do it. You don't want the resumes to turn up with bows and exploding feathers on them. You just want it to go. Can you find me the people that can do this job? Can you do it reasonably quickly? Thanks very much. And yeah, software is the same. I mean, some of the software we use. I mean, I stopped using a piece of software because it was too complex. It did too many things. And I found that counterproductive to me being productive. I was like, I'm confused. I'm lost in this like melee of all the things it could do rather than actually the thing I needed it to do, which was be able to, categorize my candidates, speak to them effectively, and then move them out. So, yeah,
And that's a
simplicity is.
massive risk, right? And
Mm,
that comes from kind of too much navel gazing as an organization. You start to think about, oh, well, what if we did this? What if we did that? And
yeah,
the field of dreams analogy just doesn't exist. It's not a
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
The most important thing that you can do is like listen to what your customers want you to build and build exactly that, and nothing else, to be honest.
mm,
Just make sure that works really, really well and really, really efficiently and solves a problem, and you'll be close enough.
yeah, yeah. Uh, Listening is a thing that you and I have talked about quite a few times, and that's not Tom telling me off for not listening, by the way. This is just we talk about listening in terms of it being a strong sales skill. It's like listening is one of the most important elements of selling. And I wanted to talk about your journey because obviously you joined Supercede as head of sales, I believe, from memory, and now you've just taken the role of chief commercial officer. Um, what Yeah, SaaS sales is a really difficult place to recruit. We do a lot of work in that space. We know how challenging that is. What makes a good software sales professional? Doesn't have to be in our market, but in your opinion, because I've always enjoyed hearing your opinion on these types of topics.
Yeah, I think like the main things that we look for are like a tenacity about things. That might be a little bit industry specific,
Hmm.
because sales cycles in insurance are very long. Organizations take a long time to make decisions. The decision-making process within insurance companies is often complex and convoluted and involves a lot of moving parts. It's important that you can, be tenacious and keep the interest of the company that you're trying to work with. But yeah, at the same time, take the time to kind of understand what that process is. One of the most important things to qualify for is what is that decision-making process, and what are the kind of paper hoops that you have to jump through as a result of that. So, and they're two completely separate things, by the way, which I could go on about for hours. But probably the question that I spend the most amount of time in an interview going over is really trying to understand that person has a like an overriding philosophy and approach to how they go about selling, and that they have enormous inbuilt faith in that process, and they have confidence in that process working. It's one of the reasons that we'd rather hire salespeople that have been roughly in or around insurance and then teach them the reinsurance bit than we would hire out and out reinsurance professionals and get them to try and convert into a sales role with us. It takes a long time because they're not entering into the environment with this philosophy already in their head that they have a huge amount of confidence in. As a salesperson, like, you're basically a salesperson. I always ridicule you for this. You deny it. You are a salesperson.
Yeah. I
And
think I wouldn't have considered myself until I headed up my own business and the way that we do it, in that I'm the front of it. So I have to sell for the rest of the business. So I think you would have been right before, but I would have fought you on it harder, but I'm not good at
um, so uh, so you will know, there is always a period of time in your career. There is always a period of time in every job that you ever have where things aren't going right. And things start to go badly and things aren't moving as quickly as you like, and it feels like everything that you touch falls to pieces. And salespeople that have a kind of a mantra and a process and a philosophy that they stand by and that they have trust in will keep cracking away, and will get through that bad period, and they will trust in their own abilities. They will trust in a process that is tried and tested. They will trust in really fundamental basic things like listening to their ideal customer profile, evaluating whether their ideal customer profile is still valid and any changes that have happened in that, making sure that they understand what processes are involved, making sure they're analyzing why deals are being lost or why deals are being held up, and understanding which parts of that they have control over and which parts they frankly don't. The danger with having someone who's kind of a conversion from an industry person into a salesperson is that when things start to go badly, they'll begin to panic. And panic involves like a massive shift in strategy, without that being planned or without that being thought out or without that being evidence driven. And it's usually because they've started to feel really uncomfortable on this philosophy that they've been brought down. And so they immediately try and move somewhere where they feel comfortable. And what that often means is if that person's early career was in MGAs, for example, and MGAs are not your ICP as a business, they'll start contacting MGAs all of a sudden, and they'll start panicking, and they'll be like, any deal's a good deal, and they'll spread themselves too thin. They won't be concentrated on their ideal customer. They won't be, and that's like, at that point, that salesperson starts to become useless. To you, because you start to lose confidence that they're able to recover the situation. They're actually making it worse, rather than better, because of the panic.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, I think about it in our space, and as you rightly pointed out, there's a lot of selling that we have to do. One of the things that and we don't really work like this anymore because we're retained search business, as you know, and we work project to project. So there's the selling, but then there's the doing, and there's slightly less pressure on the continual like volume stuff that I used to be involved with. But I remember we had this period of time when I was at Eames Consulting, and it's a very different business now. So it's not me slagging off Eames; it's the best job I ever had. But I wanted to work for myself. But Eames is a really good insurance recruiter, but there's a lot of that work was contingent, and we had to do a lot of sales calls, and they had these metrics, and what you found was people would cheat the metrics. So like you had to get certain amount of meetings. That meant you got any meeting. You had to do a certain amount of calls, which meant you did any phone call. So you would fall into this, oh, I know Tom, so I'll just call Tom, even though I spoke to Tom 2 weeks ago and I know he's not hiring. So I'll speak to him anyway, and we'll get a meeting, and then you kind of fill your diary, and that's probably the recruitment equivalent of. What metrics do you focus on? So when it's not going well for that person, what are you looking at to say, yeah, I think they're going to make it, outside of just behavior? Are there metrics, or yeah, I suppose, what are the important metrics for you?
There's only one metric that matters, and that's revenue.
Yeah.
People need to deliver it, and
Yeah.
that's what, ultimately what they'll be judged on.
Yeah.
Like it or loathe it. We are not in an environment today, you know, if you think about how people used to buy mobile phones, right? They used to go down their high street and there'd be car phone warehouse, there'd be the Link, I'm showing my age now, phones for you, and stuff like that. And you'd wander into the shop and there'd be a bunch of salespeople there and you'd have a chat with them and you'd understand like what the deals were, what the tariffs were, what the networks were. And kind of make a decision based off that, start to formulate. You'd probably need 3 or 4 visits to the shop before you made a final decision, and then you bring your paperwork in, sign a contract, etc., etc. I think now when you go and buy a phone, you go on the internet, you research the exact phone that you want with the exact features that you want. You go on all the network websites, you go on comparison websites, you go on advice websites, and you understand the exact deal that you want. And often you buy it there and then online, sign up online. You may go into a shop because you want it to be in your hand a day quicker or whatever. But you go into that shop knowing exactly what you want. And that's the way the world's going for everything. That's how people will always behave. And so even when big companies are buying software, they don't come to different companies and do research with salespeople anymore. They do research online. They download content. They ask their peer group what's interested. They visit conferences. They do a lot of research themselves. So by the time a prospect engages with a salesperson, they're already well down the buying journey. Already done a bunch of that research. And so we as a sales organization cannot treat the world like we're still living in the mobile phone shop waiting for someone to come in and ask us some questions. And it's that environment that developed it's a numbers game kind of the attitude that comes off. Like you watch films like Boiler Room or Wolf of Wall Street or like any of these like higher pressure sales films. And that's all about, if you make a certain number of calls, a certain percentage of those are going to convert into meetings, a certain percentage of those are going to convert into demos, a certain percentage of those are going to convert into proof of concepts, a certain percentage of those are going to convert into new business. And you just need to make sure the input number is as high as possible, and it will work itself out. We don't live in that world anymore. And anybody that tries to behave like that is finding that they're massively unsuccessful because they're not able to qualify properly for buying intent when it's so obvious that if someone is getting in contact with you, that buying intent is already there. So you don't need to qualify for it. You can shorten a sales process so that it matches what is now a shortened buying process. And honestly, you can get deals in the door faster. We've seen the performance is better from reps or salespeople that are taking a far more modern approach and understanding that people buying things, even insurance companies that are buying things that are traditionally old-fashioned, are acting in a more modern way.
What does that mean for the modern sales professional then in terms of kind of skill set? So they're not kind of not having to hit the numbers and pound the numbers as much. Do they need different skills, or they just need different knowledge, or what's different about them now?
They need different skills. They need to form a real partnership. So strong consultative sellers will always do well. I've always had a lot of respect for people that have sold professional services in the past. That's hard because it's like professional services is completely intangible. You're selling fresh air all the time, and that's very, very difficult to do. That requires a really consultative approach. That requires a lot of understanding about customers. That requires a lot of industry knowledge, that kind of thing. So that those kind of knowledge-based sellers are gonna come to the fore. They're going to be more successful. The qualification process is like so much more important now, and that's why we're seeing like new qualification methodologies come to the fore. We're not seeing. So there was a book that was kind of like the go-to sales manual that was written in the 90s called The Challenger Sale. And it was can't remember whether it was McKinsey or another one of the big consulting firms. They basically went in and sat in like thousands of live meetings and like ran statistical analysis over the kinds of behaviors that were most likely to result in a closed deal. And that was kind of the approach that everybody adopted from then on. And then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden, like face-to-face meetings didn't exist anymore, and everything was done online and via Zoom and stuff like that. Now, as much as that was a terrible few years for everyone, it presented an opportunity to researchers in this space, and because now all of a sudden they had access to not just thousands but millions and millions and millions of B2B sales calls that were being done. So they embarked on another study to kind of work out with a much larger sample size why deals were closing and why they weren't. And the results were published in a book called The Jolt Effect, which is one of the best sales books ever written. And basically what they boil it down to is that most people, when they initially start to sell something, what you're selling is the advantages of what you have over the status quo, over what that person is doing at the moment to solve the same problem or to tackle the same issue. And so the reason for their initial engagement is like a fear of missing out. There's something better over there. Now, when that sale starts to develop, or something starts to go wrong, or things start to slow down in the sales cycle, people's immediate response, kind of instinctive response, is to kind of double down on that fear of missing out. So let's reaffirm how much better this is than what you're doing. Let's reaffirm how much. And actually, what they're finding is that salespeople that did that, their outcomes reduced in quality. So they were closing fewer deals after kind of doubling down on this fear of missing out proposition, because people didn't have a fear of missing out. What they actually have is what they call a fear of messing up, which is that like they knew that this solution was better than what they were doing at the moment. Their issue now is if they make a decision to change how they do things, that decision is on their head. And if it goes wrong, that could mean their job, that could mean their reputation, that could mean lots of different things, but they're all negative. If I change this thing and it doesn't, and if I don't change it, like, all right, I'm not going to get an improved outcome, but no one's going to lose their job or die. Like it's like a preferable outcome to them. And so salespeople that acknowledged that and actually went through efforts to kind of de-risk the proposition that they were looking for, and made efforts to, let people trial the product and run proof of concepts with how it would work, or put clauses in their contract to make sure that people could get out if they needed to, or put provisions in the contract to help them to transition back to the way that they used to do things if things didn't work out, and like did all these things within the deal to de-risk it. Their closure rates were just skylight. Those were the top performers across millions and millions and millions of deals that were analyzed. So yeah, like interesting stuff, and I think it just shows kind of how the world's changed just in 10, 15, 20 years. To look back further than that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think I remember you and I mentioned on this before, because I have both of those books in the office, which the team probably don't read, but I've been told that they can. And I think I bought both because you talked about it. But that the one I always resonate with, being a search firm, particularly sometimes we get pressure from investors for these kind of like small SaaS businesses or small insurtechs to use kind of like really big, heavyweight Hydrogen Struggles or Russell Reynolds and etc. And it's because they've gone, well, we've used these so many times. but it's probably the wrong tool. And sometimes they'll come in themselves and go, we're not the right for a 10, 15 person startup. Like that's just not what we do. We do CEOs of kind of like global organizations, and it's just the fear of messing up. It's like, well, no one's ever been fired for hiring Russell Reynolds, right? They're the brand in the executive search space. So yeah, that fear of messing up is really interesting. I'm conscious of time, so about five more minutes probably. But I wanted to talk to you about your, you know, kind of bleeding in from sales and bringing people on that journey. You know, now you've got this chief commercial officer title. So my understanding is the whole go-to-market piece is under you. So you've got sales, customer success, and marketing. And I think there's a misunderstanding sometimes about where they come into the mix. I mean, we talk about people like customer success. Does it sell? Does it upsell? Or does it kind of just maintain status quo and on board? You know, marketing, how much does marketing interact with, you know, sales? And look, I know that's a huge topic, so probably more boil it down to kind of how it works from your perspective at Supercede. And then I want to talk about podcasting briefly at the end.
Yeah, so for us, I've actually had it fed back at some point, maybe after a few beers, but I've had it back. The kind of the reason that they wanted me to come and work here and work there was because I was the only person that they spoke to that didn't just, well, how do we sell more? We'll hire more salespeople. And that was like as far from my response as it could be. And I came in quite shortly after we raised our seed round. And so, you know, we were involved in discussions around, you know, how we were going to invest that and what bets we were going to put on. And like the first immediate question, well, how many salespeople do you want? And the answer to that was none. Actually, I want a marketing person and I want a client success person. Partly because I'm massively overconfident and backed myself to do most of the selling. But also because I don't think you can underestimate the power that those departments can bring in, especially in this modern world that we live in with the types of buyers that we have. If you're not doing marketing right, then you have no way of determining when a potential client is ready to buy from you, when they have any intention of coming and buying from you. People go off and they educate themselves. They don't fill in, like, when was the last time you filled in a contact us form on somebody's website? Like, it doesn't happen very often at all. And if it does, that person is already so researched up that they're ready to engage with a salesperson. And it's because you know what's going to happen. The moment I fill that form in, I'm going to get a telephone call and it's going to be a salesperson on the other end. And if you're not ready to buy right now, like, you don't want to have that conversation. So you kind of completely lead that research. And we needed to be able to control that research. We needed to be able to light 1,000 fires is kind of the expression that I use. All over the world, everywhere, work out. We're in insurance, so regulated industry. We don't need to do lead generation. We know who our leads are. They're all insurance companies. They have to register with their government that they want to be an insurance company. So like, there are lists. We know who the insurance companies are. All we need to do is go like fires under each of them and then monitor those fires for when they're ready. So that's super, super important, first bit. Second bit for us is insurance is they self-regulate their suppliers because they talk to one another so often. When I first got into the industry, I used to hate this fact. I used to think that it was corrupt and wrong and it shouldn't happen. And basically all insurance companies do is just hire their mates to do their stuff, and it's cronyism, and it doesn't generate the best results. I've since changed my tune on it a little bit. But that's because it's actually an incredibly effective method of self-regulation. Because if you do a bad job for an insurance company, you won't just not work for that insurance company anymore. You won't work for any of their friends. Like, potentially you're not going to work in the industry anymore. And so the pressure to maintain people having good experiences is immense. And so that's why that became like the other most important thing to us, was to make sure that everybody that did have an interaction with us, whether they bought something or not, or whether they went into a proof of concept, or whether they were a full-blown customer, the experiences that they had were of the utmost like Premier League quality. That they came away from interactions with us delighted, and that they went. That's what they went and told other people. We know long term, like around about 85% of our business is going to come from referrals of some description, and so the client success function in that is a superpower, and they are. Do they have retained revenue targets? Yes, absolutely. But they're kind of raison d'etre. The reason that they're there is to delight people and give them like excellent experiences that they're going to remember. And that's kind of all they're pointed at. And that is the other thing that will drive sales for us in the medium and long term. So that was why we focused on setting that structure up, and then upskilling those three functions and expanding those three functions as we started to see success from them.
Amazing. I was going to go into the podcast, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to recommend that.
It was part of it, right? So we
Yeah.
did a podcast called the Reinsurance Podcast.
Yeah.
A little plug there.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, when we started it 3 years ago, the name wasn't taken. We couldn't believe it either. It's now number one business podcast in Bermuda, which is the most niche
That's brilliant.
you will
That's
ever
brilliant.
hear. But it was again like it was a replication of this model. All we wanted to do was be efficient about content creation and marketing. That was it. So we started a podcast. We thought we could start a podcast, we film it. We've got video content there, we've got white paper content there, we've got clips, we've got audio clips, we've got stuff that we can use to build infographics. Like we don't need any more content generation. We just wanted to be efficient. And then we got blown away by how popular it became. So that was not what we expected. But we're obviously
it is a good podcast. I would say that I've been on it. It was a pleasure to be on it and be grilled about hiring in the space. But and I think people undervalue or under index how much people like to talk about what they do, and it's nice to hear about different people's different thoughts on what you do as well. So yeah, it's one of those kind of like, and I talk about this all the time. I'm such a advocate. I started mine as a bit of a novelty in lockdown, and now it's one of the favorite parts of my job, and the doors it's opened, and the conversations we have. And I think it's that thing as well of feeling part of an industry. And I think particularly if you're selling into, so if you're a software business selling into a space, you actually give something back to that space. And I don't mean that in sort of a purely charitable context. Of course, there's a kind of financial kind of benefit from that, but it's you're trying to be part of that community in a way that doesn't cost anyone anything to be on it. You're building that kind of network, and there's just goodwill that comes with that. And so they're brilliant tools from a marketing perspective. Tom, you've rescued me. Thank you so much. But I've really enjoyed this conversation. We've been talking about doing this for a long time, so it's just a pleasant surprise that we managed to do it last thing on Friday.
Got round to it when two other people had let you down.
Yeah. And not because you're third choice. You would have been ahead of both of them, but we just never get round to it. We're always doing something else. But thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for being a guest on the podcast.
No, thank you. Good to chat.